Hi, this is Jenna Cater, and this is my Project 2 for Psychological Foundations. I chose to do behavioral learning theories from Chapter 5 in our book. So, what is learning? Learning is usually defined as a change in an individual caused by experience. Learning is also defined as long-lasting change in the learner's knowledge as a result of the learner's experiences. Changes caused by developmental, such as growing taller, are not instances of learning. Neither are characteristics of individuals that are present at birth, such as reflexes and responses to hunger or pain. However, humans do so much learning from the day of their birth on that learning and development are inseparably linked. Sometimes learning is intentional, as when students acquire information presented in a classroom or when they look something up on the internet. Sometimes learning is unintentional, like when a child experiences anxiety on seeing a doctor with a needle. So, one of the theorists was Ivan Pavlov, and he studied classical conditioning. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov and his colleagues studied the digestive process in dogs. The scientists noticed changes in the timing and rate of salivation in the animals. So what they did is they would take an unconditioned stimuli, which are those things that provoke a response without any prior training or conditioning, and present it to the dog. And when they would respond with the salivation, that would be the unconditioned response, or a response that happens without any training or experience. It just happens automatically. A neutral stimuli would be one that has no effect on a particular response. So if the dog was sitting in the room and they rang a bell, there was no response from the dog. But then after the dog had been exposed to the meat and the bell became a conditioned stimuli, because the dog associated the bell with the meat and knew that when the bell rang that he was going to get fed. So a conditioned stimuli is a previously neutral stimuli that evokes a particular response after having been paired with an unconditioned stimuli. And classical conditioning is the process of repeatedly associating a previous neutral stimuli with an unconditioned stimuli in order to evoke a conditioned response. Skinner was another behavioral theorist. B.F. Skinner proposed that reflexive behavior accounts for only a small proportion of all actions. Skinner proposed another class of behavior, which he labeled operant behavior, because they operate on the environment in the apparent absence of any unconditioned stimuli such as food. Skinner's work focused on the relationship between behavior and its consequences. The use of pleasant and unpleasant consequences to change behavior is often referred to as operant conditioning. So what are the role of the consequences? One of the most important principles of behavioral learning theories is that behavior changes according to its immediate consequences. A pleasurable consequence which strengthens behavior, an unpleasant consequence weakens behavior, reinforcers are pleasurable consequences, and punishers are unpleasant consequences. Reinforcers. A reinforcer is any consequence that strengthens or increases the frequency of a behavior. A primary reinforcer satisfies basic human needs, such as food, water, and warmth. A secondary reinforcer are reinforcers that acquire their value by being associated with primary reinforcers or other well-established secondary reinforcers. So, for example, money has no value to a young child until the child learns that money can be used to buy things that are themselves primary or secondary reinforcers. Secondary reinforcers. There are three basic categories of secondary reinforcers. One is the social reinforcers, such as praise, smiles, hugs, or attention. The second is activity reinforcers, such as access to toys, games, or fun activities. The third is token or symbolic reinforcers, such as money, grades, stars, or points that individuals can exchange for other reinforcers. Positive and negative reinforcers. Positive reinforcers are the most often type of reinforcer used in school. These include praise, grades, and stars. Negative reinforcers. A negative reinforcer is one used to escape from an unpleasant situation. A behavior is also strengthened if its consequence is an escape from an unpleasant situation or a way of preventing something unpleasant from occurring. Negative reinforcers can be misinterpreted to mean punishment. One way to avoid this error is to remember that reinforcers, no matter if positive or negative, strengthen behavior, whereas punishment is designed to weaken or discourage behavior. Punishers. Consequences that weaken behavior are called punishers. Presentation punishment is the use of unpleasant consequences or aversive stimuli. For example, when a student is scolded. Removal punishment is the withdrawal of unpleasant consequences. Examples include loss of a privilege, having to stay in during recess, and receiving detention after school. One frequently used form of removal punishment in classrooms is timeout. Immediacy of consequences. One very important principle of behavioral learning theories is that consequences that follow behavior closely in time affect behavior far more than delayed consequences. Immediate feedback serves at least two purposes. One, it makes clear the connection between behavior and consequence, and secondly, it increases the informational value of the feedback. In dealing with misbehavior, you can apply the principle of immediacy of consequences by responding immediately and positively when students are not misbehaving. So, in effect, by catching them in the act of being good. Immediacy of reinforcement is important in teaching, but so is the decision of what to reinforce. So, you wouldn't want to reinforce a kindergartner for waiting to reinforce a kindergartner after they've learned all 26 letters of the alphabet, but you would want to take the time to reinforce them step by step as they've learned to recognize each one of the separate letters. So, shaping means guiding students toward goals by reinforcing the many steps that lead to success. Extinction is the weakening and eventual elimination of learned behavior as reinforcement is withdrawn. There's a phenomenon called an extinction burst, which is the increase in levels of behavior in the early stages of extinction. Schedules of reinforcement. A fixed ratio schedule means a constant number of behaviors is required before reinforcement is done. The response patterns. During the reinforcement, you have a steady response rate and a pause in that response after the reinforcement. During extinction, a rapid drop in response rate after a required number of responses passes without reinforcement. A variable ratio schedule is a variable number of behaviors is required for reinforcement. During reinforcement, you have a steady, high response rate, and during extinction, the response rate stays high, then drops off. The fixed interval schedule is a constant amount of time passes before reinforcement is available. During reinforcement, uneven rate with a rapid acceleration at the end of each interval. And during extinction, a rapid drop in response rate after interval passes with no reinforcement. The variable interval schedule is a variable amount of time passes before reinforcement is available. During reinforcement, it has a steady high response rate, and during extinction, it has a slow decrease in response rate. Role of antecedents. We have seen that the consequences of behavior strongly influence behavior. Yet it is not only what follows a behavior that has influence. The stimuli that precede a behavior also play an important role. Cues come in many forms and give us hints about when we should change our behavior and when we should not. Discrimination is the use of cues, signals, or information to determine when behavior is likely to be reinforced. Generalization is the transfer of behaviors learned under one set of conditions to other situations. Bandura had a modeling and observational learning theory. His observational learning theory involved 4 phases. The attentional phase was paying attention to a model. The retention phase is model the behavior you wish others to imitate and give them a chance to practice or rehearse. The third was a reproduction phase, where others try to match the behavior to that of the models. The fourth was the motivational phase. Others will imitate a model because they believe that doing so will increase their own chances to be reinforced. The vicarious learning was learning based on observation of the consequences of others' behavior. Self-regulation was the ability to think and solve problems without the help of others. For classroom applications, I would use this theory in my classroom for classroom management purposes. Providing positive reinforcements to reward appropriate behavior and punishments to demean inappropriate behavior will allow students to become familiar with my classroom expectations. As a positive reinforcement, I would use Class Dojo points and reward the students points for making good choices such as turning in homework. Class Dojo points can then be used to buy various coupons of different values. For example, a homework pass, sit by a friend, and computer pass are just to name a few. My sources were just our Educational Psychology of Theory and Practice book for the 12th edition by R.E. Slavin.